5.01, social and emotional update. I know Tami Santa is going to join us, but Dr. Kellogg, would you like to say anything before?
I would, if you wouldn't mind. Give me
Sure.
a quick moment.
Quick.
You know, there was a nice reminder in the awards tonight about the importance of this element of education. That whole piece about that basketball team's contribution to WARM, what that means to the community and to the families they touched. I mean, 10,000 fans watching you win a basketball game is one thing, but providing food and support for that many families and individuals through your efforts is just as important. And so it's just a reminder about, as a school organization, as a community, we're bigger than some of the outcomes we get measured on. And as we prepare for this presentation tonight from Ms. Santa, I remind us that when we went through strategic planning with the community, this was an area that got a lot of attention. And then when we did some reorganization with the organizational chart and we created this leadership role, this was an important piece for us on the leadership team. And we have benefited greatly. Tami has worked with us in the district for a while. And when she and I had conversation about moving her into this larger role, she was a little nervous about it. And in typical fashion, I gave her an ill-defined idea about what I wanted. Because really what I wanted was someone who I knew this area well to bring leadership. And I think you'll see tonight that quietly but effectively this year, she's done a lot of good work that I think has put us one step out to where we want to be moving forward. So with that, I turn it over to Tami for her presentation.
Thanks, Dr. Kellogg. Thanks, everyone, for having me here. What I plan to do is take you through some bits and pieces of the social emotional pieces we're working on as a district this year. And I thought I would start by just going over what my roles are as it relates to social emotional learning. So as you can see on this slide, I assist with the facilitation of the K through 12 school counselors and the school social workers. Combined, that's approximately 40 people. So I don't know how much detail you know about our counselors or the social workers or the breakdown of those folks, but we have 32 school counselors and about 9 mental health workers or school social workers. And we can talk in more detail about where those people line up if needed. But that's a nice piece for me is to have the same set of eyes across that whole group of people and to be able to bring, especially as we look forward to our future, look at curriculum, look at specific programming, to really, my goal is to bring some consistency as we look across K through 12 programming. Additionally, I provide some professional development for all staff as it relates to social emotional learning. I assist with PBIS implementation across our district, build and establishing relationships within our community, that specifically for programming and then linking our families to resources. And then overall, just looking closely at an inventory, exploring what programs we already have, where we can go, and what can be linked to the social emotional pieces for our students and for our district. I would say a critical piece to my role stemmed directly from this, the strategic planning process, Dimension 6. And so as you can see, this is a quick summary of those results, 3 big key themes that the planning process was able to give back to the community through that planning process. As I look at these themes, you'll see that I also highlighted 3 big ones in red. You know, so when you look at things, positive relationships, you know, tonight as you looked at these award winners, I didn't hear a lot about how they approached their specific, whatever if it was teaching, if it was getting food ready in the cafeteria. I heard relationships, how they provide those caring environments. And so that's a critical piece for me. The other ones would be extracurricular activities and social skills, and then providing resources to families. So this was able to give me very specific ideas as I move through the school year, where the vision of the district came from on the strategic planning process, and then where we can go as a district as it relates to social emotional learning. And then to break that down even further, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this new term, and I think it's the same term we've been talking about for a long time. It's just now social emotional learning is kind of the new catch-all for the moment. And I think it's pretty simple. When I look at it as how do we really give our students the skills to make them successful at school and after school. And if that hits on those big areas, emotion management, goal setting, empathy, relationships, decision making, those key areas. And then again, you'll see on that second bullet, relationships again. And again, I think we do that collectively as a district, but how do we become more intentional about creating those relationships in our classrooms, in our buildings, and outside of our duties as well? So these are the things that I used to direct my approach as I worked with these groups of counselors and social workers, mental health people, staff members, et cetera, as I looked at programming and what we can do to really take a closer look at the social emotional piece for our district. I'm going to break this down into an elementary piece and then a secondary piece. And what Juliet Peoples is the administrator that I support for the elementary counselors. What we did is we have 8 full-time school counselors at the elementary level, 14 buildings. We asked all of them to give us a lot of data this year. This is a snapshot you'll see on the next couple slides of that data, but we asked them to give us large group classroom delivery that you'll see on that top left slide, some small groups that some of them are offering, the individual student planning and responsive services, that's that bottom right graph, staff and family consults, those that have been linked to resources, and then some other duties that they may spend their time doing. So that is not all on there, and I also didn't put up all 14 buildings for you, but just so you have a snapshot of the data we've been collecting all year, and maybe some of the trends or some of the patterns we're seeing or not seeing. And that was the point of the data for Juliet and I, is I didn't even know what we knew in front of us. So in order to start anywhere, we had to figure out what we were already offering or doing in our buildings. So this first set of graphs, this is from a smaller building. You'll see approximately 250 enrolled in this building. Large group classroom delivery. So the first 2 lessons, met most of those students in that building. Then you start seeing some fluctuation. And usually we see that, you're going to see that consistency in these other 2 slides. Teachers start saying, hey, I know you're going to come in and do an empathy lesson. We're really seeing problems with tattling. Can you come in and do that lesson instead? You were going to do this. We're really seeing a building-driven need with this. Could you come in and talk more about this issue? And then the counselor would meet that need. They do not have a current curriculum in front of them. So there is not something that they are handed or ever have been handed to say, this is what we're going to do in our classrooms. And that struck me as, does every second grader get the same pieces? And if they don't, why not? And how do we close that? The bottom right graph, you're going to see, this is the individual student scene for this school counselor. And I wanted to see a couple things. If there were patterns there, are we looking at bigger needs as a district? Or is it by building? Do those vary? And then how many students are they seeing? These don't repeat students, so if a counselor sees the same kid every day, every week, we don't continue to count those numbers. This is just 77 individual faces. If you see them every day, you see them once. But it helps us put them into those categories. So you'll see those categories that I chose as kind of the bigger indicators. We can also drill down on that data if we need to. You'll see peer issues jump up a little bit. What does that mean? So we also can pull that out and look more specifically at, is this peer conflicts that are happening to what detail? Recess, bus, structured time, unstructured time, or are there really more skills, relationship building skills that we need to work on there? So those are those 2 pieces that you're going to see. This counselor is there 1 day a week at this building. And that is the variation. Our counselors, so we have 8 of them, some of them are in a building 1 day a week, some of them are in a building 5 days a week. So that does vary by building. This example would be a counselor who is in this building 4 days per week. So again, you're going to see those first 3 lessons. He or she is hitting a pretty decent population of those. This building has about 500 students in there. And then you'll start to see that variation happen again. And what we're hearing is, we were going to go in and do this lesson, and then we had some other requests pop up. How do we accommodate that request in addition to what we already prepared to meet the needs of the teachers or whatever it is? And so that was just a nice piece to see, whether or not we agree or disagree with what's being delivered. We have that data in front of us. Again, same thing you're going to see on this bottom right slide with the individual presenting issues. More or less students, maybe, maybe not, but again, what are these issues? Are there some issues really popping out to us? You'll see the peer issues up again. But, I think it's really helpful information for us to have. And again, here's a 5-day-a-week building, so this counselor's in there every day. First 2 lessons went pretty well, delivering to all of our students, and then we start to see the requests come in. Instead of this, we'd like to see this. Instead of this, our second graders are struggling with this, our 5th graders are with this. How do we try and meet all those building needs? And then again, pop down to the presenting issues. So we have 14 of these Google Sheets that we're constantly looking at and collecting, and we'll have a lot more substance to it by the end of the year. This is up through probably the end of February for accuracy. We're starting to see themes, we're starting to see similarities, we're starting to see differences, and that's what I needed to see to be able to even start planning. Our counselors are saying they would love something in front of them to say, here's the 8 lessons you're going to deliver. In addition to that, if your building has needs that those aren't meeting, let's start filling those in addition. So we can say every 3rd grader is getting this, 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 and this. And additionally, then if you have a building need that's something else, then we'll fill that as well. But how do we get a little bit more consistency there? We need a curriculum that makes sense and that's doable. And that doesn't just speak to counselors, that's how do we integrate something within our classrooms as well that isn't too much. So when we look at past practice of maybe second step, that's a wonderful curriculum, but it is a lot to try and ask teachers and counselors to implement effectively. So is there something else out there? And that's what we're starting to look at. Here's a timeline that we see. This year, as I've mentioned, we're collecting a lot of data, really taking a close look at it, building by building. Next fall, we hope to start rolling out some surveys and getting together some focus groups for what our community, what our staff members, what our students expect. And then really start exploring what those curriculums could be. What really could we deliver that's going to hit those big competency areas of social emotional learning? What are we going to be able to do to show, ultimately, improve student outcomes? And then with the hope that we establish something at the end of next year and are able to roll it out effectively that 16-17 school year. This does say elementary timeline. That does mean that, we are working and we will work with Jennifer Knapp's office to do a K through 12. This is just very specific to the data, and I think this will drive the secondary piece that we'll talk a little bit more about. How can we then thread the curriculum we choose into that secondary piece in the most effective way? So that's a quick summary of the elementary world, and I'm happy to go into more detail about that data. I know I could have put a lot more up there, but also didn't want to overwhelm folks. So at the secondary level, in addition to the PBIS work that I'm spending a lot of time doing, we're seeing a lot of good work there. I'm working more specifically with our high schools, rolling that out, really trying to look at expectations from a building, culture, climate, and that's been really successful. You'll see 2 other big highlights that we're working on at the secondary level. And I work on the secondary piece with Ann Baldwin and also Cynthia DeVise on many of these programs. The mentoring programs, we see a big gap maybe at the middle school level. Again, you hear about these relationships for these award winners. You hear about the relationships on the basketball team, the swimmers. Keeping those kids connected, especially those at-risk kids at that middle school level, we need positive adult contact. So what other ways can we expose these students that maybe don't have positive adults sitting at their home, or at least access to those adults on a regular basis? Some kind of mentoring, and mentoring can be examined in many different ways, but here's some of the programs that are already happening or that we have secured some funding and a grant sense for next school year to start looking at intentional ways that we go about forming and improving and increasing those adult relationships at the secondary level. And the other big piece is career and college exploration and advising. This piece is huge, and I think, as we figure out a curriculum that pulls into the secondary world, we still, our huge focus at secondary becomes attaching students to what their aspirations are. And we do that, but how can we do it more intentionally? What tools can we use to do this? I believe you would be familiar with the career advising policy that has to go into place next school year. And again, that's the very intentional there's 8 components to it, but what can we do that is going to say, here's what we do, here's what every student gets starting in 6th grade to get them started, to get them thinking, what are their strengths? Let's start highlighting them now versus 9th, 10th, 11th. We got to hurry up and figure out what you're going to do, and off you go. We have so many things coming that are fantastic with the pathways and the options. So how do we then intentionally and again consistently make that make sense across our secondary world? So moving into professional development, another big piece that I wasn't sure how this would work with my new role. So I started gathering some data as phone calls rolled in, as emails rolled in, as I try and be present in buildings on a daily basis. So as I have those conversations and try and build those relationships, this is a breakdown of how that looks. That top left graph will show you by elementary, middle, and high school where those consults are coming from. And then very specifically broken down on that, the remaining 3 graphs by elementary, middle, and high, but the presenting issue. And I chose to break those down once I started to see some themes coming out into CPS, which would be Children's Services, linking, hard cases, lethality, IEP, and 504s. And when I look at hard case, we drill down a little bit further on that. So at the end of the year, if I start seeing themes jump out, then that will give me some direction on where to go on the professional development end. Lethality, that to me means homicidal, suicidal, or really major mental health with some psychosis in there and trying to determine assessment. So that's how those break down. It is helpful because I would have had some good guesses, but without having this in front of me, I maybe wouldn't have driven my PD in the best way. So this has been very helpful for us to take it almost every month to our meeting. So on a monthly basis, we're meeting with the counselors, the school counselors and the social workers. And then there's other professional development opportunities that we have throughout the year. So you'll see that that piece, in addition to some other things, drove how I structured those meetings. Being on this side of those meetings, I know I would always want to leave a meeting with direct application to my job the next day. Well, frighteningly, then I was in this position to then provide that for those that I was talking to, which was a nice challenge. But that's what I really worked hard on is what can we bring into these meetings that they can directly apply the next day and be better and make our students better and make our district better. And so we brought in every meeting, we brought somebody in, we brought an agency person in or a private provider in to physically be there to talk about their services. You know, teaching a lot on building relationships with students. We say it, we do it, we might know how to, but how are we doing it? You know, so when we're in schools and I see students coming in and out of school counselor offices, then I can give some feedback. We're all overwhelmed, we all have a lot going on, but are we intentionally building those relationships? And then we'll talk in more detail about the outside resources that we've spent a lot of time putting together this school year. Waiver Day, I think that was a success for our groups that we were able to reach. We did a lot of highlights on those 3 items, but again, you know, going back to building capacity within this group and being very intentional about what we were going to professionally develop within those staff members. So really excited for the professional development. Can't get enough people to now that they all want to come into the monthly meetings, engaging the counselors that want to come there, who's coming next. So it's been from my frame of reference, very positive. And then resources. This is a big passion of mine. I think it's essential and an opportunity that we have that we often miss the boat on. We're on the front lines. Our every day, you know, our students and families are in pretty critical situations. It's very easy for us to say, here's a list of 5 or 6 places, you know, good luck. If you've ever been on the other side of that, it's not the best service. So we've really tried to go above and beyond with our groups, and we will continue to build this capacity. But we have to eliminate as many barriers as we can. So one example would be, you know, net care. I don't wish that upon anybody having to go down there and have their family member assessed. But if you're going to send a child or a family there, you might want to prep them for what they're going to see. If you've never been to a mental health emergency room, you don't just say, here's net care's address. So that can be more traumatic than the event that they're even going through. So in addition to bringing net care to us this year, we also have a visit scheduled in May to take our counselors to net care. Again, if we can be as hands-on as possible to prep our families for something like that, we are seeing a lot of net care visits. You know, that's the bottom line. So whether we like that or not, it's our job to prep those families for that. So that would be one example. And then the other ones would just be insurance. If anyone's ever tried to access any services and your insurance company hands you a list a mile long, when you're in crisis, it's not very effective. So these, you know, are just snapshots. We have a very extensive list of these services, but we broke it down by resource, you know, the contact, the address, if it's on a bus line, that's another critical piece. The specialty, you know, I'm learning now that I'm in the elementary world, a lot of our elementary kiddos are hard to serve because a lot of counselors don't want to see kids under 12. So really drilling down on that was important for me this year. And then the insurance column that you'll see. One thing about this list, there's no one on this list that I wouldn't send my own family member to, and I think that's what's important, is that it's easy for us to say, go here or go there, but that's what I ask my counselors all the time. Would you send your own family member there? If you wouldn't, they better get off our list. And so these people I have good relationships with. They would call me to say, hey, I'm at max, give me a hold for a month, or whatever it is. So that way, in addition to just having this information and knowing the insurance piece is gone, so now you have just removed almost every barrier it is, but picking up the phone and making that final call for an appointment. You know, and also knowing Children's is great. A lot of people use Children's, but you also need to know that they're on a 3.5-month wait list right now. So saying Children's is the best link might be the greatest service, but can we wait? But those are the things that we're really working hard on this resource end to make sure that we're getting our families linked to the right pieces. And so this is something that I think we've improved greatly on this year. We will continue to build this and to improve it so that it's one less barrier for the resource piece to our families. And like I said, this is just, I think, 2 or 3 pages out of a pretty lengthy list that gets very specific for our folks. And that is all I got for you. Questions, comments?
Who would like to start?
I got a whole list.
All right.
Most of it are just like little exclamation points with hallelujahs written beside them, so I won't bore you
I'll
with
accept
that.
those.
Yeah, okay. I'll send that to you. But I do want to start off with a couple comments. One is I want to give kudos, John, to you for your willingness and desire to create this position. I don't know if other people know, but this is extraordinarily rare. It doesn't happen. And what's so amazing to me about that is, given the difficulties that so many of our children are in, not just here, everywhere, that children in our society are in, and the difficulties that families that are facing, why are we not seeing more of this in other districts? So kudos to you for bringing that forward. I tend to believe that socio-emotional gaps are every bit as important as academic achievement gaps. And I'm very, very glad to see the way you're addressing this, Tami, very methodically and at the same time very compassionately. So I thank you both for the work that's going on there. I also give you a lot of kudos for the list. The problem that I hear about many times in my work is the difficulty of families knowing where to turn and being able to make it past that 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6-month wait that so often happens, which is utterly unacceptable when children are in crisis or families are in crisis. The way you've organized that is much more than I have seen in many other districts, which is, well, here's the resource, let's give them a call and they'll help you when they can. I appreciate the time that it takes to do that. So thank you for that. It's extraordinarily important. I am curious to know, going back to that data, and I know you could have given us
Yeah,
bunches and
absolutely.
bunches more, and I understand this is highly preliminary and that you are still gathering the data, still analyzing the data. But as you look across the data that we have across our buildings, elementary, middle, high, what tend to be the more overarching trends that you see as regards the needs of our children?
Well, and I would say there's a couple things. So on the presenting issue end, we're seeing it varies. It fluctuates quite a bit. So I have, for example, I think 2 buildings that show they've seen over 35 kids of new students each. That's a high number. Now, I don't see that at most of the others, but again, that speaks to a building need and what we can do to serve that. I think overall, we're seeing this lumped into like a peer issue as a primary thing that, again, lends itself to, when we drill down, some unstructured time and when that's happening and why that's happening. But again, then going back to, are these frequent flyers? Are these the same students we're seeing? And what are we missing there on teaching them the skills they need to resolve conflict? And then the other piece is going to be family dynamics. So again, that lends itself to a lot to drill down on, but, and we can use that. That could be from, domestic violence to single parenting to just a lot of chaos. We've tried to separate some of those pieces, but those would be the 2 bigger themes that we're seeing with kind of peer issues, behavior, and the family piece. I think it's hard to weigh when I look at the graphs and I see a spike on peer and maybe just a little bar on CPS. That little bar on CPS might outweigh some of my other things. So that's also what I'm trying to be cognizant of. And we'll look at that a lot more, intently when we see it all in front of us. Because just because it has a little bar doesn't mean it might not outweigh some of my taller ones based on the significance and maybe the more severe of issues that we're seeing along those lines. So we are seeing some similarities, which is interesting, that we can then loop into a curriculum to see if then that decreases. Because again, if we don't have a consistent prevention model that we're trying to deliver on a regular basis, will that impact those individual case numbers? I don't know, possibly, but at least we'll have that going into it to say, here are some big pieces that we're missing. And the other piece is if you don't have an evidence-based, research-appreciated curriculum to tell your teachers you're coming into their rooms and they've got their own set of expectations, they may not have that door open to say, come on in, as maybe possible that would be better if you had something to say, this is great, it's proven, it's going to make your life better, they're going to learn math better, let us in. And I understand both sides of that. So I have been talking, very specifically to administrators, to teachers, to, all pieces of this to figure out where we can improve. But those would be some of the general themes that we're seeing. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer?
And this is one of the most important pieces of work that we have begun. Thank you.
First, I'd like to commend you. I really appreciate the fact that your focus is evidence-based. I'm very happy that we're not chasing anecdotes or intuition, because a lot of times, obviously, that doesn't get us where we need to go. So putting a focus on tangible numbers, what they're telling us, totally appreciate and understand kind of next level of analysis around prioritization, severity levels, and absolutely understand, given the business that I'm in security, that sometimes the most important item is not the one that represents the largest volume, right?
Right.
One incident can be too much. But I think that what I also find interesting in the last almost year now, a lot of questions that I get around the issues of social emotional learning tend to focus on a lot of feedback from the community about, well, I don't understand why the school district is in this business or in that business, or why do we feel the need to extend services ranging from, I don't know, Wi-Fi connectivity to underserved populations and school social behavior training, all these types of things. And what I find really interesting about it is if we think about really the collapse of public health policy as it relates to particularly social, emotional, and behavioral issues, the multi-month, which I've experienced with members of my own family, waits for services, the condition of insurance programs and supporting long-term treatment for people that need it. We think about that collapse, and I think about it in terms of our primary mission, which is the students. What always comes to mind in those conversations that I have with people is that there's one thing that I know for sure. If we have a kid that goes home at night to a family where there is abuse, whether it's physical or sexual or emotional, they're going to bed hungry, there's continuous stress and pressure around bills and finances and any number of other things, I can guarantee that they're going to have, at least on a probability basis, a much worse educational experience when they come to school. So if we have a better chance of creating a better educational outcome for that student, I'm not sure why I wouldn't be in that business, right? So I'm really glad that we're doing it, as we've done so many things, Dr. Kellogg and the district, in the last couple of years in a planful way, understanding that there's immediate crisis and need right now, but in order to put something out there that has legs and is sustainable, we need to do it in a way that is backed with evidence and that is supported with a structured program. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. And, that reminds me of Suzanne Kyle is the administrator I support for social workers, and she gave a great example for our community who sometimes don't get it. They don't get you can tell them there's trauma at home. You can tell them that there's all these difficult circumstances, and it's like, well, too bad. And so she gave a really beautiful example of, has anyone been to a haunted house? And all of a sudden, all the hands go up. Well, imagine sitting in a haunted house and doing your homework, sitting in a haunted house and studying for that exam. And it finally brought some people back to, I can't really put myself in, in an empathy position for the abuse and the neglect and what might be going on, but all of a sudden, trying to pair that with something that we can get, as simple as a haunted house. We've got too many kids that are living in a haunted house every day, and that was a very simple way to explain to a lot of community members that that's a simple trauma world that they live in, and that's their reality. So I appreciate that feedback.
And just let me tag onto that, to both of you. I can appreciate the difficulty you have with knowing when to involve the parents and when not to involve the parents, because I think there are times, obviously, you need to involve the parents. They need to be a part of that somehow to know what's going on. And then there are times that maybe it's not a good idea. So it's very difficult to be able to weigh that with situations and families, and that is a touchy area. So I appreciate what you're trying to do there, because there are times when parents shouldn't be, maybe, occasionally. But in general, we don't want to leave the parents out. They need to be involved, especially as you're getting into the curriculum, and they need to know what's being taught and so on. But that's a tough one.
You're absolutely right, and we have a lot of that professional development. When you see those hard cases and troubleshooting those hard cases, it's often really just walking people, administrators, counselors, staff members through those hard phone calls or those hard conversations. And it's not fun or easy, but I think it's the right way to go. And I would say 99% of the time we do, involve those parents from the get-go. There is that anomaly sometimes that for safety reasons we may not, but you're right, it's difficult.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just real briefly, I have been looking forward to this presentation, and it's primarily, just truth be told, it primarily comes out of my vocation. I am trained as a counselor. I do a lot of counseling short-term, and then I do a lot of referrals. And I'm just always humbled realizing when people open up a very vulnerable part of their life to you. And I know that in school, sometimes for kids, that's a dicey thing for them to let you in that close. I'm very moved by the fact that we are trying to enter into human beings' lives, the children and the staff, to enter into their lives and say, your academics matter, your athletics matter, but your social, emotional well-being at the core of who you are, the soul of who you are, if I can use that term, is really important. And yes, it'll impact all of the other stuff, but even if it didn't, it still matters to care for people at a deep level. And so what you are trying to do, and then the whole presentation of really trying to do this with, as Richard was saying, with some data and trying to get some trends, and then trying to figure out the curriculum that would be most beneficial, and doing it from my perspective, only me, on a not as many person power people could be helpful. So you didn't disappoint me in a direction that you all are trying to take this, and I look forward to hearing from you. I hope just as this continues to unroll, to unroll and to make a difference. I think you started it well. I think you're on the right path. And what you're doing matters critically. So, thank you.
Just one real quick question. When you collect the data for elementary,
Yes.
where do you get that? How do you get that data?
We get it directly from the school counselors, so they collect it on a spreadsheet for us. It's a it's a Google Sheet. It's just a lot easier to
It's
enter.
not part of the Common Core testing or anything?
Correct, not at all. And then what they do is they send it almost every month, a month and a half, to me and to Juliet. And then additionally, I do follow-up with those administrators. And not to say, but when you're asking for just a human being to hand you data, you can write anything down on a piece of paper. So we, check and balance that with, is this what you're seeing, these people going into your classrooms and attempting to do? Does this look, accurate? Because there's always going to be some room for error, but that is the pretty simple way that we're just gathering it directly from our counselors and then confirming that through their principals.
I want to wrap it up. I know you were going to say something, but I want to circle back. We talked about people who say, why do we do this, and so forth. But I think it's really important to underscore the fact that great swaths of community members said this is important. I don't want there to be an impression that we're swimming against the tide here. This is what large portions of the community said we needed to do. They're right. But I just wanted to make sure that we didn't let that go.
Yeah, and it was nice. I was thankfully just part of that strategic planning Dimension 6 process without knowing this would be, where I'm sitting. So to look back and reflect on that and be part of that process, I think that's huge to have that connection.
Okay, I have a couple things that popped out. 32 counselors, correct?
Correct.
9 social workers.
Yep.
And we have not quite 15,000 kids in our district.
Yep.
9 full-time counselors in 14 buildings in our elementary schools?
8.
8, okay. And so how do we decide, and I assume it's by kiddos in our schools, we have some that are there 5 days, 4 days, 1 day, how do we come about with that?
Great question. Historically, that's what I've tried to figure out. There was a plan that goes as far back as I think 07, 08, when Amy Miller was in charge of the school counselors at the time, and maybe there was only 3 or 4, splitting buildings and doing a rotating basis. So it looked like there was a plan based on 5 or 6 factors, meaning enrollment, free and reduced lunch numbers, specific building needs, other resources that building deemed, if that was a lot of special education units within them. There was a variety of factors that then drove a plan at that time to roll out additional counselors, which did start to happen. They got to 8. I believe the plan had 12 was the ultimate goal. And there was a few more buildings at that time as well, but then the cuts and some things happened. So that plan kind of halted, and we've been at 8. So I don't know, and that's what Julia and I will take a closer look at with Barbara Wallace, is let's look at our current buildings and what we have. Are we, if we're going to sit at 8, are we in the right FTE for those buildings at status quo? And I think we need to make some adjustments there if we're going to stay with 8 counselors. But there was some method to it going in, and then that was halted. So now we're re-looking at that with some other indicators.
But they do float around based on need.
Ideally, maybe. They are assigned buildings on certain days. So no one has more than 2 buildings, which is a good thing. But if you're, let's take the magnets, they get 1 day a week. That's 30 some days a year. They get a lot of calls like, hey, can you come over? It's a hard dance for them to try and figure out, because their other building is a 4-day-a-week building that has a very high need, and trying to figure out where you release and where you don't, but to still meet that other need, especially during the snow days and testing. It was a pretty ugly picture to be in if you were sitting at Emerson or Hamby.
Yeah.
So, they do try and be, are responsive, but, and I also support them to say, if you can't go, you can't go. Not to say that school doesn't need you, but if we go to an on-call basis, they may never get out of their car based on each building. So it is tricky for them.
But you're working on that.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I'm going to go on a little bit further. Mentoring programs. They're in all of our middle schools, correct?
Some.
Okay.
So as you look down that list,
I did, yeah.
the model program will go in place next year, and right now that is grant funded, and that will start at Heritage only for 60 students. We don't have the capacity to pop at other places, but I'm very data driven, so we'll gather a lot of data, the targets closing that achievement gap, and then see if we can then spring that to the other 3 buildings. each building has something, but not all buildings have everything. So, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
So as you go down that, there's certain ones that I would say just a couple that really would hit all of them. But no building is without.
Okay.
But plenty of
bothersome.
room for improvement.
Yes,
Yes.
and I'm glad. I can tell that's what you want to do.
Yes.
And I really am just wondering. I'm not trying to point
Yeah.
things out. I have
Yeah,
no
yeah.
clue. So who facilitates these programs at the middle schools?
It varies. The model program that'll go into Heritage next year will be Cynthia DeVise and myself.
Great.
And then Boys Won't Be Boys will also be Cynthia and I. TGIF is grant funded by Winner's Choice, so they come in and do all that work. We have usually the school counselors being the liaisons, but they provide all the staff to complete that. Girls on the Run, that fluctuates. Or
Right.
Girls on Track, it varies on the elementary or middle school. Common Sense Culture, it's grant funded, so we have a person come in, and again, those are intermittent, but he is willing to come into all programs, and it's more of a risk avoidance program. He's also hitting a couple of, I think a couple of the Genoa and Blendon maybe have boys groups, mentoring groups run by some staff and administrators, and so he's infiltrating those as well. And then I know there's 2 other groups that counselors run, but it's just started this year, so I can't speak to how well those are going for mentoring.
And will they take place during school, after school? So
During.
so everyone or
Yeah,
people that need them.
And
will
that's
be
probably the
able
only
to.
piece I didn't touch a lot on, the extracurricular piece or the linking piece, and I think that's going to be a tall task for me next school year. But I think things have to happen in some more accessible way. So we feel with these programs, they have to happen during our school day if we're going to hit give everybody in that building a true equal chance at attending. So we've been very creative. The buildings have been great to give us lunch and seminar time to really infiltrate some programming.
Okay. And then you mentioned NetCare. I have no clue what NetCare
NetCare.
is.
That's a good thing that you don't know. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I live in a different world where NetCare is every day, so
Yeah,
it's a nice refreshing statement. NetCare would be like going to an emergency room,
Okay.
but they only specialize in mental health. So there's 2 locations. One on South Central is specifically for children, so under 18s, and then there's another location. But I have never been to NetCare when it hasn't been a pretty difficult place to be. And so with that it's a mental health emergency room, open 24 hours, and you see a lot of mentally ill kids and families in there 24 hours a day. So that's the piece that a lot of the positive with NetCare is it's free. So when you're assessing a kid and one of our students needs to go get assessed because they're suicidal, we can go to St. Anne's, we can go local, but can they afford the bill? And so I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where they're like, I know my kid needs help, but I can't afford a $5,000 hospital bill.
Yeah.
So fortunately or unfortunately, if we can't make that leap, then NetCare is free or no cost to them. I mean, it is all funded by other dollars. So, but then to walk them through that process and prepare them for, there's metal detectors, there's white walls, it's pretty institutionalized, and you may see all sorts of things in that waiting room. And then you may have to leave your kid there for 24 to 48 hours. And then they do a beautiful assessment. So they are trained people to do mental health assessments and link before you leave their facility. So there are benefits to it, but they do come with some difficult things at times. So that's where if people can afford or are insured to go to OSU or Children's, then that'll be our first recommendation. But if they can't and we don't want to give them one more burden, then NetCare would be the next best spot.
Okay. Thank you so much for all that you do. It's very obvious that you care and very passionate about your job. And I know Dr. Kellogg would like to say a couple words.
Just a quick couple observations and comments. One, there's a medical term, universal precautions. And I think part of the problem with social emotional learning and kids in crisis and family in crisis, we tend to be reactionary, guidance counselors jumping in cars, going to the emergency. And we tend to consider certain populations of families and students more susceptible. The fact of the matter is any of us who have family, it can be in our household anytime. And how it presents itself at school can be very difficult. Some kids, you don't see it and you don't have any clue initially. Other kids, it shows up the second they get on the bus. So the idea that we don't treat this as reactionary to or assume some people are more susceptible than others is really important. I think that's part of the work Tami's doing. 2, the willingness of our guidance counselors, social workers, principals, and teachers to work with our staff, and Tami mentioned several people kind of work in this domain, I think has been just admirable. And there's been a thirst in the district for that leadership and for that direction. She mentioned writing curriculum, finding the right program. I think it's just been fabulous. And I commend staff for that, because I put Tami out at an island, and quickly the island filled up with lots of people who see a need to do this work with kids. So that's really good. And they really responding to Tami and other people's leadership. The other piece is, Dr. French, you mentioned parents and involvement, and there's parent and involvement as it relates to the situation with that kid. But the other important one, because you asked about Common Core, and that to me drives back to that parent involvement piece. So when you start talking about, this is a place that can be very difficult for a school district, when you start talking about implementing curriculum around social emotional learning, that can quickly get at people's tables, family tables, and be discussion about what the role of the school is, all right? So I'm sensitive to that for lots of different reasons. Tami also mentioned she's working with the curriculum department, because within the curriculum department is where we do the curriculum adoption cycle, right? And you know, state law now requires parent and community involvement in that. So this would be one of those places that I would expect a high degree of parent involvement in looking at what we're offering with kids and informing them what we're doing. We had a very quick learning experience in this at one point related to curriculum we were doing with middle school kids in the district. And we all thought we were doing the best thing ever for all these middle school kids, until a parent with a different perspective because of their life circumstances saw it differently. And I felt, when I walked away, I felt we had done a poor job of letting that parent or any parent really know what their kid was being involved with. And that was the question. Just tell me what this is so I can make a decision about whether or not I really want my kid exposed to that. And I think that's a fair question, because the parent's the first teacher, we're the second teacher. And we don't always know what's best for that family, that child, that time. So those are some things, just some thoughts moving forward. So I too thank Tami and her team for the work they're doing. I like the term social emotional learning better than some of the other ones I've used. So I think I got the acronym now. It's SEL. I like it. We're going to sell it. So thank you for your time and expertise on this. I look forward to seeing where we get.
Thank you.